All right, for some reaction on the President's announcements, we're now joined by the Democratic Alliance interim leader, John Steenhuisen. John, thank you so much for your time on ENCA this evening. Let me get your reaction on the first part of the President's announcement, the decision to actually close schools for about a month. How's the DA reacting to that this evening?
Well, we don't support the decision. We think it's a very bad decision, and we don't think it's in the interest of the learners of South Africa. What is very clear is that the President has chosen to put the teacher union, SATU, and to bend the knee to them and put their interests first over and above the interests of the learners. The decision this evening is not backed up by the science. It's not backed up by the education experts. And it's certainly not backed by the data that we've seen, that teachers or children are any more vulnerable to the virus in schools. And I think that it's also evidence that this is not a scientific decision by the fact that there's a different regime for grade 12 and 7, as if they are somehow more immune to the virus. This is not a good decision. I think it's going to entrench inequality in South Africa's education spectrum. And as The Economist magazine very clearly set out this week, it has devastating impacts for developing countries when you have school closures like this.
Well, the President will argue the decision has been backed by the World Health Organization, because he did indicate that, the World Health Organization has always argued for a balanced consideration. So you're looking at the educational needs of the children, but you're also considering the community transmission. And the World Health Organization has been consistent in saying before you decide whether or not you open schools and allow pupils to go back to school, you have to look at community transmission. And if that is not low, the infections are peaking, then that is not the best way. It's not the best time, really, for pupils to be returning to school.
Well, this is the same World Health Organization that told us that mask wearing didn't make a difference in the beginning of the virus. I would say to answer that every country's circumstances are unique. South Africa's circumstances are absolutely unique. But what is very clear in the South African context, and it's borne out by the data, you only need to look at the data to understand that you're dealing with a category of South Africans who are not vulnerable, and that teachers themselves are no more vulnerable at a school environment as they would be going to a shopping center. But the long-term impacts on South African children and on poverty and inequality in South Africa, I think, are going to be absolutely profound. This is not a decision that's been made with the best interests of the learners at heart. It's a decision that's been made once again with the faction that is able to shout the loudest. And I think the President was clear this evening that there was engagement with over 60 stakeholders, but there was no consensus. And the reason there was no consensus is because education experts, scientists, doctors have been saying there's no need to close the schools, that the risk of transmission is very low, and that losing an academic year is going to have far more profound consequences for deepening poverty in South Africa, which is incidentally the biggest killer in the South African context.
Let me get your thoughts on the decision to close only public schools, John, for a month and not private schools. What do you make of that as the DA?
Well, I think it's bizarre, and it's bizarre like, just as I said, you've got different protocols for grade 7 and 12, as if grade 7 and 12 learners are somehow got an inbuilt immunity. Why would you have a week for grade 12 and 7 learners, but a 4-week period for others? It just doesn't make sense. And clearly, this is what happens when the unions force you to bend your knee. I would say that, as I said earlier, what this decision is going to do is to entrench and deepen inequality in South Africa. And there is one example. Children who are in a private school are going to be at a distinct advantage because they're going to be able to graduate sooner. The quality of education, the time that they've been able to receive in a classroom is going to massively outstrip their compatriots and colleagues in public schools. And I just don't think this is a good decision at all. I think it's not backed up by science.
Well, the President has also spoken tough on corruption, John. He's announced this evening an investigation center that comprises different law enforcement agencies. You've got IPID, the NPA, the Hawks, SARS, the SIU, amongst the other organizations. He's announced that so far they're investigating about 36 cases. How confident are you as the DA that this is a good decision and will actually see some results? We'll see people being prosecuted for overpricing the goods and services during this period?
Well, look, any efforts to combat corruption and maladministration are welcomed. It is just unfortunate that the President didn't heed our call at the beginning of the process to be able to establish an Inspector General for the COVID funding. There's a problem with the SIU and these other organizations. They've got to go back and look retrospectively at corruption that has already happened. If you had an Inspector General in place, you could have prevented the corruption from taking place in the first instance. But let's be completely honest. This is a president that's been talking tough on corruption for the last 5 years. We've had a Zondo Commission running for an extended period. We've had the state capture. We've had the parliamentary inquiries. Not one person's gone to jail. Not one civil recovery has taken place. And until we see people in handcuffs, until we see these things taking place, I'm going to keep a watching brief on it. I think that the efforts are good, but, we've got to deliver the results, and those results are people going to jail. And here's the big test. When those ANC councillors who've been behind food parcel corruption, those ANC individuals who've been rigging tenders in the water department, those ANC individuals in KwaZulu-Natal around the PPE scandal there, end up with orange overalls, that will be the biggest test about whether this is talk this evening or finally we're seeing the tide turned against corruption and action being taken.
John Steenhuisen, the DA's interim leader, thank you so much for your time on ENCA this evening. Sally, the big question there is, are we going to see people in orange overalls? I mean, how many people have been prosecuted for state capture, for instance?
Yeah, I have to say that is what we need to see, and I think that is what South Africa needs to see to feel reassured that corruption is still that it's not endemic, it's not entrenched, and that it is being fought against. And won. And of course the issue of corruption, and I mean it's important that the President raised the issue, it's important that he's made these announcements, and let's hope there is some action. The other big issue of course from this evening is schools, and social media is raging on what it all means, especially the issue of public schools, private schools not mentioned. We do know that on some private school terms the whole of August is pretty much a holiday, but we also know that has all changed, and some private schools are on a 3-term, some are on a 4-term, so it absolutely needs to be clarified. And I do think that it was critical actually that the President made it clear what happens for everyone, public or private.
Yeah, and I think now we need the reaction of the unions, and that's what's coming up here on ENCA. Stay with us.